Hey everyone, my name is Talha. I'm the co-founder and CTO at remotebase.com. With me is Sherwin. Sherwin is the VP of engineering at User Interviews. He graduated from Yale back in 2012. Did an internship with Google for 3 months, worked with Asana 1.5 years. Sherwin is a big fan of Zen. He practices it regularly, and he lives in the Bay Area. So welcome, Sherwin.
Thank you for having me, Talha. Glad to be here.
Yeah, so it's a rainy day today, by the way. Is it raining on the East Bay as well?
It is quite rainy here as well, and we've
Quite
had
rainy
like
there as
3 weeks of rain recently.
Oh yeah, so it's gonna rain throughout the weekend. So yeah, let's see. Anyways, so Sherwin, VP of Engineering at User Interviews. So how does it feel like, being the VP and the head of engineering, and every engineering engineer working under you? So how does it feel?
That's a great question. I'm about maybe 5 months into my role, and
Hmm.
it's been a really good learning opportunity. Sort of just working with a bunch of really, really great leaders that I admire, who aren't necessarily engineering leaders, so the people on the executive leadership team, and then also working with the existing management structure, the
Hmm.
really great managers and engineers that we've hired. Um,
Hmm.
I think so. I mean, you were asking like, oh, what's it feel like to have every engineer
Yeah,
work?
what,
Yeah,
and more interesting, like, what does even User Interviews do? Like, what do you guys do as a company?
sure. Yeah, I can share a little bit more about that. So user research is a thing that pretty much every company that wants to build a good product wants to do, right? Like, I actually want to
Hmm.
go talk to a user. Like, Y Combinator
Hmm.
talks about this. It's important to actually go talk to your
Yeah.
users.
Hmm.
Um, and it turns out it's actually quite hard to do that, right? Because first, like, how
Hmm.
do I go find these users, right? So that's sort
Hmm.
of the founding story of user interviews, is that the founders were actually working on another startup idea. They were starting to run out of money, and they were
Hmm.
like, well, let's brainstorm 10 more ideas and let's go validate these ideas. How do you go validate them? We got to go talk to like 50 people for each of these ideas and see if the problem actually exists, right? Um,
Exactly.
while they were doing that, they realized it was pretty hard to go find people to talk to. Like, if I want to launch a new app for dog walkers, how do I go
Uh-huh.
find dog walkers to go talk to and see if this helps them, right? And that's
Uh-huh.
sort of where user interviews was born. And when they were doing this, we're like, oh, maybe we should go talk to some like user researchers and see, do you have a problem finding participants to interview and to do research on? And sure enough, everyone said that was like the hardest part of the problem. So what user interviews does is that we're like the
Uh-huh.
easiest way for you to find high quality participants and conduct user research. So you can sort of think of us as like a CRM for doing user research. So you
Hmm.
can, if you don't have an existing audience,
Uh-huh.
larger companies might have an existing audience of like uh, beta testers, people that they've worked with in the past, who they've done focus groups with, etc., who will
Hmm.
give them good feedback. So you can use us and basically import your audience and then just like manage that as like sort of a CRM. You don't want
Amazing.
to
Yeah. Yeah.
much. If you
100%.
don't have that audience, you can also use our marketplace and go find people, right? So it's like, hey, I want to talk to 50 people between the ages of 18 and 25
Hmm.
who use TikTok. Like, if you don't actually know those people, it's hard to find them, but you can just literally get those people within like a couple hours on our app.
And on the marketplace, so the people you're talking to, they get paid for reviews and all.
Yeah,
Oh,
so
that's pretty
you
amazing.
you
That's
would
pretty
basically
interesting.
say like,
Yeah.
hey, I want to offer an incentive, and
Uh-huh.
that might be like a $50 gift card. It depends on like, so it's a marketplace, so you need to think about how much you want to offer. If it's a really, really unique sort of background, you might have to offer
Hmm.
quite more. If it's like, hey, I just want to talk to anyone who uses TikTok, well, there are probably a lot of them, so you don't need to offer that much.
100%. Yeah. And how big is the engineering team right now? It sounds like it's a very mature platform now.
Yeah, so our engineering team's about 30 people.
30 people, and you all watch all of the teams. Like, you're the head of engineering, VP of engineering.
Yeah, I'm the head of engineering, and then I also work closely with our CTO, who is one of our co-founders, who's
Hmm.
more thinking about the long-term technical direction and strategy. So it's pretty common for organizations to think of like engineering as like a two-track sort of career, where you have like
Very
in
much. Yeah.
right? And then I'm sort of on the organizational side, doing a lot of hiring, management, coaching, thinking about culture, organizational processes, things like that.
I'm very curious to know, Sherwin, like how does it feel to work so closely with the co-founders? Like, that essentially means that you would be a big part of or major part of a lot of decision making processes, and how do you feel? Like, do you feel responsible towards that, or do you feel like I've just given my opinion and it's up to the management now if it implements it or not?
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic question. The short answer is it's great. I get to ask a lot of like very open ended questions just about like what's our strategy? Why are we doing this? Can you explain it? And I trust that they have thought about this a lot more, but I want to understand the motivation and reasoning and step A, step B, step C. What is the logic behind all that we're doing? And what's interesting is that when I'm reflecting on this is like those are things that I should have been asking at all stages of my career, right? Like even if I'm just an IC and I just joined a new company, like when I look at people that I've managed who have been successful, or my peers who have been successful, it's always the people who are always thinking about like, what am I doing? How does that ladder up to my team's goal? How does that ladder up to the company's goal? And like, how are we going to move this company forward? So in some sense, I'm still doing that, but like I'm just doing it at a higher level now, right? But that's something that like hasn't really changed from a mindset. But I just get to talk to my like a co-founder about it and understand their take, rather than talking to my manager about like, hey, how do you understand this particular goal? Why is it important? Why is it so critical that our company does this?
But I also see that you co-founded your own company back in the days when you graduated from Yale. So does that founder spirit still lives in you? Does it still help you in achieving the goals you want while working with your current co-founders and the current management? Like, how does it play out for you?
Yeah, to some extent. I will say that I will be the first one to say that when I sort of founded that startup straight out of college, I really had no idea what I was doing.
Nobody has that idea, to be honest. Nobody has an idea.
Well, I think there are some founders who don't have an idea and they're able to like be very like self-critical in a good way, where they're like able to be very honest with themselves and learn quickly. And I don't think I was quite doing that. I was very much locked into this sort of idea like, oh, I'm the technical co-founder. I want to solve really hard technical problems. I want to be this brilliant engineer. And that was, it was helpful in that like I did learn a lot because I had to build everything myself and I had no one else to rely on. So I got really good at like reading open source code because there's a problem. I need to go figure it out, or like figuring out how to hack together solutions. So it built a lot of technical confidence, but I think there was a mindset of like, is what you're doing actually that important for moving the business forward, that I wasn't really engaging in as much, and that I had to learn that much more slower through working like at an actual company where there are other people who are thinking a lot about this.
No, but sorry to cut you here, but did you have a non-tech co-founder to help you with business and all those perspectives? So like, how did that play out for you?
It was great. My co-founder was a CEO. He was fantastic and knew a lot about the sort of space we were operating in, and we would brainstorm a lot of this stuff. And he's still one of my closest friends. He's actually the person who introduced me to Zen practice, actually.
Nice.
So he's fantastic. I think that I had a little bit of a mindset, and I look back on it and I'm a little bit embarrassed, and it was naive of me, but I was thinking like, okay, I'm the technical co-founder. I'm just going to build the thing. Sure, it's important for me to understand the customers and understand like the vision here, but like ultimately it's just my responsibility to build, and like I'll brainstorm with you, but like I'm not going to drive any of that stuff, right? I wasn't being proactive enough. So I think like whether you're a co-founder, whether you're an engineer, whether you're a manager or a senior leader, it's always super, super important to like go back to like, what am I doing to like make this company successful? And that requires like understanding the strategy, right? And like the actual business decisions that are being made.
And to be honest, a lot of CTOs fall into that trap. A lot of like, for example, they just focus so much on the building part that they just tend to forget the rest. And then obviously again, as a founder, you should be responsible for the other aspects as well. Like, if the company needs code to move forward, it should be code. If it needs something else, then it should be something else. So yeah, I think you're very right here, and probably that's a big reason that you transition yourself to the more towards to a role of being a product manager later in your career, or was it something else?
Yeah. So after I worked on my startup for about 2 years and did a few other startups, I joined a
Mm-hmm.
company called
Oh,
Benchling.
sorry. You did other startups as well, because I only know about
Yeah,
the one
they're
that you
not
did.
even on my LinkedIn because they don't really go
Oh
anywhere. But
yeah, I couldn't find
I
those. So
yeah,
how many were there? How many were there?
like 2 or 3. Like, it was like, let's try this. Let's apply for Y Combinator. Let's see if we can get in. And nothing really stuck. And I also was like, again, still wasn't really quite sure what I was doing, right? But
So that was your
eventually,
rebound startups,
yeah, a bunch
after.
of rebound startups, exactly.
Nice.
Yeah, and again, the best part of those is like working with really, really good people and learning a lot while you're
Yeah,
doing it.
yeah, obviously,
There is
obviously.
a like, there was always part of me that asked like, oh, if I had just gone to Google or any of these like other name brand companies and stuck with it for a couple of years, I would have probably gotten a lot more mentorship,
Mm-hmm,
and actually like growing as an engineer because there would be a environment that can possibly teach me.
mm-hmm,
And I have some interesting thoughts about that trade-off, which I'm happy to talk about. But the what eventually happened was I
mm-hmm,
was like, I should probably just join a company. And
mm-hmm,
I joined this biotech startup called Benchling. I
mm-hmm.
was the, I think, fifth hire there, and
Oh,
we were
nice.
a very, very small company.
Mm-hmm,
And it was mostly just like I knew some of the folks, I knew that they were brilliant engineers, and I
mm-hmm,
didn't. That was sort of all that I wanted at the time, right? I actually
mm-hmm,
have a biotech background. I studied biochemistry and biophysics in college,
mm-hmm,
um, and I was like, this will be a really, really good fit for me. And what was sort of interesting is that over the next couple of years, I
mm-hmm,
noticed that my own interests weren't actually gravitating that much towards the product around me,
mm-hmm,
because I thought like, oh, I have a bio background. I'll be able to think about what we're building for our customers. What I actually noticed was, just for myself, like the things that I care about are like the people that I work with. Are they
mm-hmm,
happy? Are they motivated? The processes that we're doing, like, oh, hey, this sprint planning meeting doesn't seem that efficient. Maybe we could
mm-hmm,
change it this way. So I was giving a lot of that feedback to my manager, and we were talking about it a lot.
mm-hmm.
And at the same time, we also needed people to step into managers as the team was growing, and we had grown from like 5 engineers to
And you
10.
were hacking as well alongside. You were hacking every single day, but you
Yeah,
at the
I
same time
was
you
still
were
working
giving
on
these
like
ideas to the
JavaScript
management
code.
as well. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I
Okay,
was shipping
okay.
code
Very
every day.
interesting. Very
Yeah,
interesting.
but that's sort of how I sort of shifted more into a management role. And
Uh-huh.
then at the sort of, just I'll share a little bit more personally. At the same time, I was starting to get deep in my sort of spiritual practice and get more into Zen
We'll get
practice.
into that, by the way, Sherwin. No, no, no spoilers, please. That's the most important question, by the way. But
Sure.
but but
So
but
so
but,
we'll
but
put a pin in that. But that
yeah,
that
yeah, yeah.
shifted a lot of my thinking in my career as well.
This was the defining moment. Like this, like obviously, was this also around the time when you were introduced to Zen, or was it
Yes.
before it?
It was, I think I basically, when I moved to San Francisco to take this job.
Exactly. This company was in San Francisco, right? This biotech company.
Yep, yep,
So you moved to the city, and then you were introduced to Zen.
yes.
How was that like? So I would want to know, like, what is
Sure.
Zen? How has that changed your life and impacted you?
Yeah, yeah. So the story is pretty short. So this first co-founder that I worked with, he and I would talk a lot about sort of philosophy, Buddhism,
Uh,
meditation, and it was mostly
uh,
just like we were both interested in this. But then once we stopped working on our startup, we both ended up in San Francisco, and he was like, "Hey,
mhm,
sure, we gotta go check out this place." Um,
uh-huh.
he brought me to the San Francisco Zen Center, and they have sort of just like community meetups.
He
And
was
that's
into Zen first, like he was already into Zen, or
I think
was
we were
it
both
also the
into like
process?
meditation as a sort of, there's a lot of like, just like, oh, meditation will help you be more productive and be more focused.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I hear that all the time, by the way.
Yeah. So like I was really into that. And
Uh-huh.
I was, especially as a founder, like it can be quite stressful. I was like, okay, I'm doing some
Yeah.
meditation. It's going to be
Hmm.
helpful for, you know, making me more effective at work, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then so I started going to the San Francisco Zen Center, started going on some retreats. I enjoyed the community that I met there. It's a lot of like people who tend to be very thoughtful and mindful and considerate. So like I'm enjoying all of that. And at the same time, I'm starting to shift my role at work, where I'm like noticing that more of my attention is falling
Mm-hmm.
on people rather than purely
On the
technical
people.
matters, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I also see that like my, you know, just the simple practice of like sitting and like being aware of your emotions and your thoughts is making me more cognizant of the emotions and sort of situations of other people. So I'm becoming more passionate and empathetic. I'm like, well, these are all great things. I'll just keep on doing that, right? So
Okay.
just,
I'm
yeah.
gonna stop you here, Sherwin.
Mhm.
Just a step back. So you went into the Zen Center with your founder, and you meet with a lot of people, and you see that
Mhm.
they're very mindful, they're very aware, and they're happy. They seem happy. So who were these people? Like, were they founders themselves, or like where were they coming from?
You know, that was actually one of my favorite aspects of the Zen Center was that in during that time it was sort of just like a complete assortment of folks. So there were certainly
Mm-hmm.
people who work in tech. I mean, it's San Francisco, right? But
Yeah,
there were
exactly.
a lot of just like there were artists. There were people who like, oh, I'm like a baker, and my friend brought me
Mm.
here, right? So just all sorts of people who are sort of searching for some sort of maybe like some are searching for like deeper meetings. Some are just like, I want to check this out. It's in my neighborhood, right? But it was a very, very eclectic group of people.
And then, did you make a lot of friends there? Because I have an acquaintance in who lives in the city, and his barber is his best friend. And I once asked him, like, how can your barber be your best friend? He says, all the other people are just founders. I cannot make friends with founders. I'm a founder myself. I cannot make friends. So,
Right.
were you also able to make friends because of that, or how did that turn out?
Yeah, I did make some. I mean, so this was like, you know, 8 years ago. I have made many friends I still sort of keep in contact pretty closely
Hmm.
in today.
Hmm. Nice. And then transition in your job, and then you came across Zen. What happened afterwards? Like, how did that balance strike?
Sure. So I think I was sort of mentioning that I'm seeing like a lot of the benefits of this sort of just like practicing meditation and spiritual practice, helping me in my career because my role was shifting towards like looking after people and becoming more
Hmm.
compassionate, empathetic, right?
Hmm.
Um, I think the other sort of like big thing that was so I guess like I mean I can talk about like the sort of spiritual progression on one side. I can talk about like the
Uh-huh.
career progression on the other, and then only when I
Uh-huh.
look backwards, I'm like, oh, there are sort of like ways that the dots connect. So do you want me to talk
Uh-huh.
about one or the other first, or how do you want me to?
I'm more interested to see the spiritual side of it first. How it turned out for you and all of that.
Sure. So after about 4 years at Benchling, where
Hmm.
I had this amazing opportunity for me to like be a manager when I was quite young and early into my career, and I really, really enjoyed it. I left, and then part of me was like, I don't really know what to do with myself. So I went to go travel for a little bit to just like
Oh, you did.
explore, and I took almost a year and a half off of work actually.
Uh-huh.
Um, and that was actually probably the most fruitful period of my life. And I know it's a tremendous like luxury and privilege to be able to do that. It was definitely
Uh-huh.
nerve-wracking to see like my bank account balance going down every single month, which was just like burning money.
Uh-huh.
But it was really, really important for me to like spend some time to just first like deepen the spiritual practice, which was like at this point I would say I was like serious about it and like, oh, I'm
Uh-huh.
seeing the benefits here and I'm like committed to
Uh-huh.
it. And I want to learn more and read about it and explore it. But
Hmm.
during my travels, I was invited by a friend that I had met while traveling
Hmm.
to go to Dharamsala in India, where the Dalai Lama has his seat of government in his temple. And he gives like
Uh-huh.
open
Uh-huh.
every, a few times a year. So I went to one of his
Uh-huh.
lectures. Like, oh, how like I have this perfect chance because I'm traveling anyway. I don't have a
Uh-huh.
job. I
Uh-huh.
get to go see Dalai Lama speak. That's pretty cool. So I went to
Uh-huh.
that. And then it was sort of at that moment where I'm like, this is a really inspiring sort of tiny town. You just see monks in their robes walking down the streets every day. There are a lot of like animals, just like cows and monkeys. It's, it's very, very different from what I was used to in San Francisco. And then I kind of realized like, I kind of want to just sit here and like do some reflection and think about it. Because I had really what I thought I was trying to figure out was like, what do I do next in my career? Because my identity had been so wrapped up with being an early engineer and an early employee and a manager and a leader at the company Benchling, that when you sort of strip that away, I'm like, what should I do next? Right. So when I actually try to like explore that, I realized that, what should I do next in my career was probably the wrong question to ask, because who am I was actually the bigger issue. Like, I don't know who I am if I don't think about myself in the context of this job that I had, right? Because, working at a startup, you certainly understand this, like it becomes part of your identity, right? And if you work with all these people, you're giving a lot, you're wholehearted in it. It really, really sort of seeps into every aspect of your life. And now I don't have that anymore. So I'm like, okay, yes, it's important for me to figure out what I should do career-wise, but first I need to figure out who am I, right? And then I was basically like, all right, I'm just gonna like sort of hang out here, read, journal, reflect, read my previous journals. I'm like, I keep a lot of notes and like reflections. I just want to like figure out. I didn't really know what I was doing, but I was like, I just want to like sort of see what comes up, right? So I ended up spending almost.
And you're still in India.
Yeah, I'm still in India at the time. And again, it was just like another attractive aspect. It was like the cost of living there was very low. So I'm like paying $10 just like stay in a hotel. I'm like, okay, this is good. There's like no internet also. So like I can't really even be distracted. Right. So it was mostly like I just have to be here with my own experience, my own memories, my own recollections. And what I sort of set out to figure out was like, what are the things that I know to be true and to be important to myself based on my own experience, rather than like what I've been told by my parents or what I've been told by a mentor or other founder or my boss who I admire or these other people who are successful, right? So there's a lot of this like stuff, these like tiny nuggets of wisdom that people will pass down. And I'm like, oh, that sounds good. Is it actually true? Do I actually believe it for myself? So I kind of wanted to like sort of just synthesize all of that and figure out like what actually, when I look at it and examine my own experience, has been true for me, right? And that was like it took almost like 3 or 4 weeks. I'm just like writing, reflecting, thinking.
3 or 4 weeks.
It was like,
and you were alone.
I was alone. Yeah, I was alone during pretty much.
Thinking and all.
And what I really want to do is like figure out what, like, who am I? What are my like life principles? What do I truly believe? And eventually I had that, and that was I sort of just wrote down like in a document for myself, like these are the things that I believe to be true for me, and these are the things that like I think are really, really important, and I aspire to like live my life by these values, right?
And can you share what those things were? Like, very interested to know.
I'm happy to share them. The caveat before I share them is that like these will sound sort of just like generalizations that might not mean anything to you or to your listener, but they mean a lot to me because like I actually did the work for my values, right? And I think the tricky part is that like someone can tell you this thing, it's not going to mean anything to you if you haven't done the work for it yourself. So but I'm happy to share them, and we can talk a little bit more about them. The first value is to realize my potential, or life principle, to realize my potential. Just something that I realize that's like sort of my mission statement. Like I always am trying to figure out how I can be the best version of myself. The second is to see things as they are, and this is almost a idea that is like taken directly from one of my Zen teachers, and a lot of people in the Zen sort of Zen community talk about this, like things as they are and act accordingly, right? But it's basically like I need to be like really, really honest and like with myself, because we all lie to ourselves. I need to keep a pretty close eye on what reality is. Like if I'm deluded, or if like just because I want something to be true doesn't make it actually true. So like being really really in touch with like how things actually are is key. That's like your starting point, right? The third principle is to cherish and cultivate the relationships that matter. So this is just something I've always known about myself. Like the people in my life are really, really meaningful. But also the people who just sort of come into your life and then they disappear because you never had the chance to like really form a lifelong friendship with them. Those are valuable too, right? So just like the ones that don't stick around, you should cherish those relationships. And the ones that do stick around, because of circumstance or whatever, you should really cultivate and invest in those, right? So just acknowledging that like other people have made my life so much more rich. The fourth principle is to keep the long view in mind. So that's pretty straightforward. Like, don't lose sight of the big picture. Think about the long-term game. Delayed gratification is important. Understanding when to push, when to sort of work sustainably towards something. Understanding second order, third order, fourth order consequences, not just like what's sort of top of mind at any moment. And then the fifth principle is sort of more metaphorical, but I would describe it as take care of my garden. And this is actually a metaphor that I think about a lot, which is I sort of just imagine the things that come up in my life as a garden that I'm taking care of, right? So when you're gardening, sometimes you have the opportunity to like lay out your perfect garden. You want some watermelons, so you plant watermelon seeds, and then you can water it and take care of it. And then many months later, you might get some beautiful, delicious watermelons. That's great. There are also times when you do all of that, you take care of your watermelon, you're doing everything that the plant needs, but then there's just a drought that happens, and then your watermelons die. And there's literally nothing you can do about it, right? And that's sort of just like sometimes there are circumstances that are outside of our control, and we need to accept that. There are also times when like I don't actually know what's in my garden. Maybe I inherited this garden from someone else. Maybe the wind deposited some seeds, right? And I can really, really want watermelons, but if the seeds in my garden are actually, I don't know, squash, then there's nothing I can do, right? Like I can want watermelons all I want, but if the nature of the situation that these are actually squash, no matter what, I'm not going to get watermelons, right? So the sort of like, if I take a step back from those different scenarios, the interesting thing is that what you do in each of those situations is the same. You take care of your garden diligently and sort of let its true nature express itself, and then just sort of accept what happens, right? So for me, this is just a reminder, like whatever happens in life, just take care of the situation. Be like earnest, pay attention, be wholehearted. And sometimes it'll work out exactly as I hope. That's fantastic. Sometimes there will be a surprise where like, I didn't even know what I had in my garden, but like this thing emerged and it's beautiful and I should accept that. And there are times when like I do everything right and things still go wrong. And I have to be gentle with myself and accept when that happens as well.
So these were the 5 things that came as a result of that meditation. So how long?
Yes.
That's amazing, to be honest. Like, and how long did it take you to come to this conclusion? Like, have these points or realize all these points?
It took about a month of just sort of like, I think maybe halfway through, I was like, oh, I think what I actually want to do is like write out like what are the things I believe to be true. The first 2 weeks was just like rereading like 2 or 3 years worth of journals and like reading some of my own reflections and reading some spiritual texts and just like trying to like figure out, like get into this mindset. And then about halfway through, I'm like, okay, I think so. This is my approach was maybe a little bit interesting. I was like, I'm just going to write down all the things that could be true that are like meaningful and pieces of wisdom. So like I wrote down all the sort of like tiny things that my parents would say to me growing up, a lot of like Chinese proverbs and like lessons that my parents taught me, right? I wrote down the things that like, famous founders and famous like people who have been really, really successful, athletes, all these things that people have said. And just these different quotes. I'm like, okay. And then like, what have I actually learned myself when I actually look at like big decisions that I made that I either regretted or, turned out to be really, really good for me, and just sort of write this all down. And then I basically do like a principal component analysis. I try to like group them together, see what the themes are, and then try to like, write and just think about what comes up here and how can I sort of consolidate this into something that is really, really meaningful for myself.
And were you also making those connections? So, for example, you said that the first thing that you learned was to see things as they are and act accordingly. Like, were you also making those connections at the back of your mind? Like, how can I go back to the city and start implementing on these things that I'm learning right now? Or was it a different approach for you?
I think a little bit. I think I was thinking a lot of just like what has my prior experience taught me. So like let's see things as they are and act accordingly. Um, Certainly that has like general applications to life, but even just like for my work, like there were many times I'm like, oh, I think I have an understanding of how this team is operating in just engineering work, or I think I have an understanding of like the customer problem here, but like, do I really like? Can I get closer to the truth here? Is like something that sort of comes up. But then the other part of your question is like, what was this like going back into the real world? Like, oh, it's great to spend a month sort of on my own thinking about all of this, but like, how do I actually apply it? How do I like, what does like contacting reality actually like? I'm not just going to sit in a mountain for the rest of my life, right? And that was actually, I didn't really know what to expect, right? But when I eventually came back to San Francisco, it actually, I think I noticed a few interesting things. One was that it made me worry a lot less about certain things. So at the time, I still didn't have a job lined up. So I was still like watching this like bank account go down,
Yeah.
right?
You came back after a month after this was over. So you came back like after a month in India.
Yeah. So I had been traveling for about like 6 months, and then this was like the last month of that.
Oh, that was
period.
the last leg, yeah.
Yeah. So then I
And
came
then you
back,
came back.
and then there was like, oh, should I be worried about this? And we're like, well, maybe I should actually look at my life principles and see what they say about this situation. Right? So I'm like, well, I don't have a principle that says I need to make money and feel safe, right? So I'm like, okay, but I do have this principle like, oh, I need to take care of my garden. So like, what would that actually mean in this situation, right? So when you actually apply that, it's like, well, I need to make sure that I'm not doing something that's like really, really bad for me long term. Like, I don't want to go broke. I don't want to be in debt. That would be something that's bad. But like in this moment, are things actually okay? Do I feel like I'm learning and growing, and like, is life rich every single day? Yes. So I'm like, while I'm continuing to monitor that, I'm actually okay with my current direction, right?
For example, if I have to cherish all the relationships in my life and I'm leaving those relationships behind, I'm an immigrant, I'm coming to the Silicon Valley just to innovate, just to find work and all. So how does that fit in then? Like I can either work or I can cherish those relationships. I can't do both at the same time. So does this logic still apply with that aspect?
Yeah. I think this is actually where I would lean towards the other piece, like keep the long view in mind, right? Which is like,
Yeah, exactly.
there are times when you do need to like sacrifice one thing that's important for another. And ultimately it's on me. I mean, it's on every one of us to like, to sort of use our judgment and trust our instincts on what should actually happen in those situations. Relationships I found are things that like, a lot of relationships can be quite resilient. Like I've had friends or, family members who are like, don't talk to you for a while. And the other person reaches out and they check in on me. I really appreciate it. And then we don't talk for a while and then they do it again. I'm like, oh, I really appreciate that. But I can't do that forever because what I found for relationships is I get it out of them as much as I put in. And I need like, every relationship has to be a sort of like give and take, right? So I want to put into these relationships at some point. There are times when like, oh no, I'm actually just feeling really, really empty and I'm not in a place where I can support other people. And then I can rely on the people around me to provide support, right? But then when I do feel like my cup is overflowing and I am doing really, really well, then all I want to do is support the people around me and make sure that they're happy and successful as well. And then I think that transfers into like balancing that with your work, right? So
Yeah.
Yeah.
Amazing. That's an amazing thought. And then obviously take care of the garden, like that relates to everything that is like connected to you, like your career, your relationships, and everything that probably encapsulates everything, this fifth point.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's pretty amazing. And perfect. You came back, you had a different perspective about life. So where did you get a job after that? Like, coming back to the city.
Yeah. So
what happened after that?
After I came back from my travels, I spent about another year sort of just like learning stuff.
Nice.
Working on my own project. I wanted to build a note-taking app. I also was just doing a lot of more like spiritual practice. And then eventually I took a job at Asana, which is sort of workflow management, no longer a startup. They're a public company now. And Asana was always a place where I really admired their culture. Actually, when I was at Benchling, I had read a lot of the sort of stuff that they had done at Asana. I was like, oh, I want to try to implement some of this here. And I also felt like it was a good place. So when I sort of came out of this, I think my sort of career North Star was like, I want to become the best sort of engineering leader possible, right? Like I want to build world-class engineering organizations. And I feel like I'm decent at this, but I don't have any guidance. I've never had like a really, really strong mentor in this. I want to go to a place where there's like really, really established best practices where I can learn and grow and in the actual like craft and art of management. And I think Asana was a pretty good fit for that because they provide a lot of support for managers.
I was, by the way, a friend of mine was a power user of Asana back in 2019, and brilliant software, to be honest. That I was using it with a lot of teams, and to be honest, that worked really well. So, what do you mean by the best engineering leader? Like, what did you have in mind? Like, you joined Asana; it's a big company, it's growing super fast, and you've joined it. So, what did you do the first thing, like in order to become that leader that now you want to be?
Yeah. So one really interesting thing, it's a big transition going from from being a people leader or a manager at a company where you sort of grew into it. You were promoted. Before that, you were a engineer, and so you have all the context. It's an entirely different shift when you're like, oh, I actually have done none of the engineering work here, and I'm being hired as an external leader. So that's one like really tricky mindset shift. So like one was like, well, I need to like learn a little bit, not just a little bit. I need to learn a lot about the product and the code base and the challenges that my team is facing. So that was one thing. There's just sort of like, oh, I need to like, I mean, in Zen practice, we have this term called beginner's mind, where it's like, in the mind of the beginner, there are many options and possibilities. In the mind of the expert, there are few. And this is just sort of to suggest that like, oh, we think about expertise as something that's like really, really great, but expertise really just narrows your perspective, right? It's like, oh, I'm the expert. I know how things work, right? And then it sort of closes your mind off. So, and in a lot of ways, I was leaning into this like beginner's mind mentality. Like, I know how one company operates, which is Benchling. That's what I spent 4 years at. But I really need to like shed a lot of those assumptions and just like look at what's happening around me, like build relationships with people I'm managing, build relationships with my peers and sort of stakeholders, cross-functional partners, and really understand what this is by itself and be open to all this new information and observations.
And then you started making friends in the company, and that was your starting point where you started to connect with people. And then, did you also connect with what was the level that you connected with the engineers? Like, was it like, were you making friends with them, or like, what was your into that team where, you knew that you have to manage this team? So did you just take them out for lunches? Like, what was that connection like?
Yeah. It's again a great question. I think my approach to building relationships with people at work has always been like, I will tell every person I work with, like, for me at least, I get a lot more out of work and I'm more energized if I get to know you as a person. And I'm personally pretty open. I try to be vulnerable. I try to share things that I'm worried about at work and outside of work, things that I'm excited about at work and outside of work. I'm generally a pretty open book. I also like would love to have that relationship with other people, but I want to respect their own boundaries. So not everyone wants to be that open at work. So it's always like an offer. Like I want to meet you where you are and like see you as a person and get to know you as a person, if that's something that you're willing to do. And I will always like lead by an example. So, in a conversation, I always try to share a little bit more about myself. And if I see someone engaging, then I will try to ask more questions about that. But for the sort of like people that I'm managing, I'm really trying like, hey, I'm responsible for your career in some sense. Sorry.
Yeah.
Not responsible, but like I'm here to like give you guidance on your career and help you grow as a person. One thing that I frequently talk about is like, I want to understand not just what your goals are at this company, but sort of like in your career in general. Like, where do you see yourself 5-10 years from now? What is like the end goal? It's like how we think about what you should work on and what you should prioritize in growing is very different if you're saying like, well, 5 years from now, I actually don't want to work in tech at all, and I want to, go open a cafe, right? I've had people who have said that to me. Versus like, oh, I want to be a VP of engineering, or I want to be a senior staff engineer, right? Like it's a very different mindset. So like one is like, I want to understand how they're thinking about these things beyond just, hey, what are we doing at this job together? And then also for some people, even just like what matters to you in life, like beyond even your career. It's like, what's actually really motivating you? What energizes you as a person? Who are the people in your lives that are important? That sort of stuff. So spending a little bit of time on that helps me really understand a person. And then I try to sort of keep that context when we're actually talking about, okay, so what project do you want to work on next?
And did you also promote Zen?
I'm always happy to talk about this sort of stuff. It's like I don't want it to be an uncomfortable conversation for other people. So some people are really, really interested and curious, and then we actually sort of talk about it quite frequently. And other people, they're like, okay, I know this is something that Sherwin cares a lot about, and that's great, right?
And Sherwin, I also wanted to talk about that you said that it's easy for you to be vulnerable at work, even if it's a new company for you. So how does that work out? Like a lot of people, I mean, I wouldn't want to be in that place where I have to be vulnerable, right from the start, or, it's very hard for me, or to be honest, for a lot of people that I've worked with, it's very hard to be vulnerable in front of your peers who will be judging you at some point if you keep doing that. So how has that worked out for you?
That's a very good question. I think it's generally worked out pretty well. And I think it takes practice. Like being vulnerable is a skill that you can develop. And it's helpful if you're already in an environment that's conducive to it, right? Where you see your founders and your senior leaders doing it. And you're like, oh, I want to follow that example, right? So that's why I try to model that behavior for other people as well. The other sort of thing that I've noticed just looking back at myself is like the times that I've been happiest in my career are when I bring my full self to work and I'm like not just sort of siloing portions of like what's going on outside of work. And when I go to work, I shut that off, right? So, for me, that means like, okay, if I'm going through a really challenging personal life crisis, or if I'm going through a breakup or something like that, like I can share that to the extent that like, hey, this is obviously going to affect how I'm feeling at work, right? And I remember one of my like early managers was just like, hey, if that's happening, that like I want to understand it. I'm happy to talk about it, and also you should just do what you need to take time for yourself. And they were really, really supportive of it. The other sort of thing that I think about a lot now is that like it's really exhausting to pretend being someone that you're not.
Yeah.
Right? And there are times when I've done that. And sometimes I'm sure I still do it at some point. And then, in my meditation and my journaling, I like try to identify those cases and like really examine it. But that's just like a general takeaway. Like if you actually look at yourself, like, is this who I am? Am I actually trying to, or am I trying to be someone else? And a lot of the times in my own experience, I've identified those as places where it's like, oh, this would just be easier if I didn't have to have that mindset. If I didn't have to try to impress these other people, right? I just want to be who I am.
100%. And Sherwin, thank you for sharing that. I mean, this has been a really insightful session for me. One final question, and that's probably the most important for my own self as well, because, what sort of a manager are you? Like, what do you think of yourself as a manager? And what can we learn from your journey as a manager?
Yeah. So I think those are actually two questions.
And we'll learn something out of it if you just tell you what kind of a manager are you. So
I think I will put it this way.